Samsung just released their top-of-the-line tablet. Apple rolled out their new iPad Pros earlier this year. So, let's make them fight. Not actually fight, it's just a metaphor. I'm Brad, by the way. I review tech for creative professionals, and these tablets, they're both fantastic. We're pitting them against each other, and one's gonna win, the other's not. But what you need to know is that they're both really great, so no matter which direction you wind up going, you're probably going to really enjoy it. Because I made review videos where I tried to find fault in these devices, and I completely failed. Not at making the videos, but just figuring out what's wrong with these things. There's not a lot of faults. Maybe the price? They're very expensive, and these tablets are probably overkill for most people, but if you want the best of the best, these deliver. So let's start this up. Give me a category here. Okay, cool. We'll start with the screens. Both of these come in at two sizes. The iPad has an 11-inch and also a 13-inch. The Galaxy ditched their 11-inch model this year, and they ended up going with their 12.4-inch. That's the Plus model, which is a little bit smaller than the iPad Pro's largest model. And they also have a 14.6-inch version, which they call the Ultra, which is kind of huge in your hands when you're holding it. Now, the resolution of these devices are pretty comparable to each other. We're talking about pixel density and that sort of thing. They both look fantastic. You're not going to see pixels when you're looking at this. They're so crisp. But they are different aspect ratios. So the iPad is coming in with a 4:3 aspect ratio. That's a little bit more squarish of a rectangle, whereas the Galaxy tablets are a 16:10 aspect ratio, which is something that's more common to see in film and videos and that sort of thing. So what are the pros and cons of these aspect ratios? Well, I think the iPad is pretty good for using in different orientations. For example, if you're using it in landscape for drawing and that sort of thing, it's really good. But if you flip it over to portrait, it's still very comfortable to hold. When you get to that 16:10 ratio on the Android, when you move it over to that portrait landscape, it just feels really tall, maybe too tall. And when you get to things like reading or that sort of thing, maybe it's not quite as good, although it's not bad either. For drawing, either one is fine, I find, because especially when you get to these larger sizes, just having all of that real estate, all of that space to draw on any of these tablets is really nice. Now, when we're talking about watching content, watching videos, watching movies, that 16:10 ratio of the Android, you're probably going to enjoy that more because you're not going to have this same black bars along the top and the bottom of the device. You're just using more of that screen. So it's a trade-off depending on how you plan to use your device. Now, Samsung has one of their standard OLED panels. Samsung makes some really beautiful displays. That is no different here. Now, the iPad, though, has a dual OLED display. So what they're doing is taking two of those OLED displays and sandwiching them on top of each other. What that really does is that really cranks up the brightness. And you can see that when these are next to each other and you really crank up the brightnesses both. Hey, the iPad looks brighter. I don't know if that's really going to show up on camera much, but in person, you notice. The thing is, I almost never crank the brightness that high. If you're in an outside scenario, I find the iPad Pro, the new Pros, to be phenomenal. There is a nano texture display that you can get with the iPad, and when I tested that out, I was truly blown away by how good it looks in outdoor environments. If you're going to be drawing outside, even in a really sunny place, that new iPad Pro with that nano texture is fantastic. Now, what Samsung has done here is they've added the same anti-glare coating that they've been using on their high-end phones over the last year or so, and that really shows. Now, the iPad Pro I have here is not the nano texture. It also has an anti-glare coating, which is also pretty darn good. Comparing these two devices with last year's S9 Galaxy, you could really see that, hey, these coatings do a decent job. I think the Galaxy coating is a little bit better than the iPad's coating, but really we're kind of splitting hairs here. They're both pretty good. Also worth noting, since these are the highest end displays that these manufacturers make, they're both running at 120 hertz, which is also pretty nice for drawing. What it's going to do is it's going to reduce the lag. The animations are going to look better when you're flipping between screens and doing that sort of thing. It's nice to have, and it's not something you necessarily are going to find on their lower end tablets. So this round, it's a close call. I think they're both beautiful, but because the iPad has that tandem OLED, that dual OLED, I think it's gonna edge this out because its brightness goes high. All right, give me category 2. What do we got? hardware. Both of these start with 256 gigabytes of storage, and you can upgrade that. You can pay more. The iPad Pro is going to go up to 2 terabytes. Galaxy Tab is going to go up to 1 terabyte. Now, before you judge that, one thing that's worth keeping in mind here is that the Galaxy Tab has a little slot for a micro SD card. So if you do need more storage, you could upgrade it yourself, and you could do it pretty cheap. That's another area where both of these devices get really, really pricey, because if you do want to jump up from like 256 to 512 gigabytes of storage like on board, is really expensive. We're talking another $200 for both of these devices. If you want to jump from that to a full terabyte, another couple $100. The other thing worth noting is the amount of RAM you get goes up based on your storage configuration. So the iPad Pro comes with 8 gigabytes of RAM by default. Goes up to 16 gigabytes if you get a terabyte or 2 terabyte model. The Galaxy Tab starts at 12 gigabytes of RAM, and it goes up when you get to that 1 terabyte model to 16 gigabytes of RAM. Now, if you hear 8 gigabytes of RAM, it may scare you off, especially in a Pro product. If you're from the PC world especially, I tell people if you're looking for a laptop or a computer, you really want to get something with 16 gigabytes of RAM or more. That's really not the case with an Android tablet or an iPad. These things run significantly well with less RAM than their desktop counterparts. It does matter when you get to things like Procreate will limit the number of layers you get. The latest app, ZBrush, which is a 3D rendering app on the iPad, it is dependent on how much RAM you get. So if you get to that higher model, you get twice as many polygons in your sculpt. You still get a lot of layers, you still get a lot of polygons, even on that 8 gigabytes of RAM. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. Now, when these iPad Pros rolled out, this was the first appearance of Apple's M4 processors. Over on Samsung, we have not a Snapdragon this year, but instead we get a MediaTek Dimensity 9300 Plus, which right now is the best MediaTek processor that's on offer. Whichever you go with, you are getting the top of the line of what's available in tablets right now. Generally, I understand the M series tends to outperform whatever Android processors are available. But here's the thing. With these devices, they aren't that demanding. The multitasking isn't nearly as robust as it is on the desktop. So when we're talking about actual real-life app performance, it's not quite... In fact, it's not nearly as important here on an Android or an iPad as it is on the desktop. So this time around, I'm going to give the trophy to Samsung, even though the processor isn't as powerful in terms of raw performance, and it's not that Snapdragon that a lot of people may have wanted. It's definitely good enough to do anything you need to do. The reason I am giving it to Samsung, though, is for me, 12 gigabytes of RAM is going to win out over that 8 gigabytes. Also, the storage configuration is important. Most people are probably going to buy the smallest configuration in terms of storage, which is 256 gigabytes. To get more on an iPad, you got to pay $200. To get more on that Android tablet, you can pay that $200 or just get a micro SD card and just do it yourself. It's so much cheaper, and it just seems like a better value. All right, time for the next category. What do we got? Brad's Art School. That is not a category. Learn to draw in 60 days. That's just a course. Do it again. Every day, a new video lesson or homework assignment. Is this an ad? Come on now. I just need to show the discount code so we can move on. All right, there we go. All right, one more time. Can we get a real category going this time? All right, better operating system. Oh, come on now. People are going to hate me for choosing a better operating system. I love all my children. How about this? We'll talk about which is the better app ecosystem, because that's really the important differentiating factor we're talking about here. Whether you want an iPad or Android is a matter of taste and kind of what you're used to. So let's go over some of the apps that are available. Let's start with the iPad. I love Procreate. That's probably the most popular drawing app available for the iPad. You also have some of the Adobe apps that are available. You have Adobe Illustrator. That is a scaled down version of Illustrator. That's not full Illustrator. You have Photoshop, scaled down Photoshop, not the full Photoshop. If you want desktop versions of those, though, the closest you're going to get is Affinity Designer or Affinity Photo. Those are available on the desktop and on the iPad. You're also seeing video apps starting to come over to the iPad too. There are video apps that were available before, but now We're talking about full-blown video apps, things like DaVinci Resolve. Apple has released Final Cut Pro. These are pro-level apps. You also have other pro-level apps coming to this thing. For example, ZBrush, which is a 3D sculpting app, now is available on the iPad. But there is another app. It's called Nomad. It's supposed to be very similar. I know. I still got to try it, guys. It's on my to-do list. It's available on the iPad and on Android. So let's go over to Android. Talk a little bit about that. Clip Studio Paint, my favorite thing to use on there. There's iBez Paint X. I really like using that. There's an app like Medibank. There's apps like Concepts. But here's the thing with all of those apps is that they're all available on the iPad as well. What is available on Android that's not available on the iPad? Krita. Because Krita is an open source app, there were some people who volunteered basically to port it over to Android. But also because of the licensing of that, they cannot port it over to iOS. And Krita on Android is okay. I find it to be a little too menu oriented, a little too desktop-y for Android, but it's pretty solid. And again, it's free. So if you have an Android tablet and you're interested, you might as well download it and try it out. Android does have some other apps that have become available last year or so. For example, there's an app called HiPaint, which is basically a Procreate clone, and it's pretty solid. Not quite as good as Procreate, but not bad. Samsung themselves have jumped into the art app, note app space with their own app called Pen Up. That is kind of cool. It lacks some of the features that I'm looking for in a pure art app, but there are some other things going on with the pen. For example, there's some haptic feedback in that S Pen, which feels really good if you're drawing with a pencil or that sort of thing. They're doing some neat stuff there. And again, it comes installed on this Galaxy tab, so you might as well test it out if you're interested. The video apps, there are some video editing apps out there, but for the pro level video apps like Final Cut Pro or DaVinci Resolve, there's nothing quite like that here on Android yet. There's also Dex. A lot of people love Dex. It's not really a thing for me because I like using my Android tablet as an Android tablet. What Dex does is it gives you kind of like a Windows or a Linux style desktop, really something that's meant to be controlled like with a mouse and a keyboard and that sort of thing. A lot of people love using this on their phone because they can use their phone as a phone during the day, plug it into a larger monitor, and then just type away, write documents, check emails like they would with a desktop computer. Kind of an all-in-one thing. Apple has done some interesting things with their operating system. None of them have really worked for me. I think Dex does it best. But still, since I'm looking at art apps, Procreate, the Adobe apps, the Affinity Designer apps, now ZBrush, I think the ecosystem over on Apple wins out for me. So congrats, Apple. All right, let's get another category up in here. What do we got? Pens. Okay, so I love me the Apple Pencil. It literally is my favorite thing to draw with. So it is going to be hard for me to be unbiased here. But the Samsung S Pen is very, very good. This is a Wacom powered pen. When you take these two styluses, you just hold them at the same time. The very first thing you're going to notice, the Apple Pencil just feels more premium. It's really well weighted. It feels good in the hand. The S Pen feels fine, but it also feels pretty lightweight. Both of these pens have batteries. The Apple Pencil is battery powered. You snap it along the top and it charges there. The S Pen, it charges too, but its Bluetooth features aren't needed for drawing. So if your S Pen ever runs out of charge, that's okay. You could just keep drawing with it. Some of those Bluetooth features are like the ability to navigate some apps from a distance, like using little aerial things. They're kind of just features, neat features. I don't really use them. Some of the haptic feedback they've added to it requires the battery. That's kind of neat, but most apps don't implement it. The latest Apple Pencil has added some haptic feedback as well, but they're not using it necessarily for drawing so much as they're using it for if you squeeze the barrel, it feels like you're actually hitting a button. There's also some barrel roll. There's rotation available on that pen. So Apple has been upgrading the Apple Pencil. I don't know if we're going to see too many upgrades in the future because it feels like they've kind of perfected it with their latest Apple Pencil Pro. So here, I am going to give the edge to the Apple Pencil, but again, that S Pen, Wacom powered, still really good. Give me another category. What do we got? Accessories. Who has the better accessories? Well, let's start out with the Magic Keyboard cover available for the iPad. It is $350. That is a lot of money. It is really nice. It feels great to use. It feels great to fold out. It's fun to type on. The way Apple has implemented like the mouse and the cursor using the trackpad is really, really good. That is something that Samsung hasn't quite mastered yet. They've just kind of added it in. It doesn't feel as natural. Apple has another case called the Folio cover. I use this more than the keyboard really because it's really built for drawing. I can prop my iPad up if I want to view like videos or just have it kind of off to the side. I can also flip it over and it comes in at a really nice drawing angle, and I use it all the time. So I don't really use the Magic Keyboard cover much. Samsung also has a book cover case, costs about the same amount of money. But unfortunately, it only really stands up at one angle, and that is for viewing media. So even though the way it folds over is kind of clever and neatly designed, it's not as functional. It's not for drawing. They also have two keyboard covers available. One is their Keyboard Slim, which is $200. That's a nice looking case. I have not gotten my hands on it, but I like the fact that they're offering a cheaper version of that. Also, they have their standard book cover keyboard, similar to what they've had on previous devices, previous versions of the Galaxy Tab. That's coming in at the same $350 mark for their largest size, just like Apple's Magic Keyboard covers coming in at $350. Those are really high prices for keyboards, considering you could get like two premium, hardcore, awesome mechanical keyboards for that price. These things aren't Bluetooth. These things are just keyboard cover. The winner here, this one is tough. The keyboard prices are way too high in my opinion. I'm gonna go with Apple though, just because their smart cover can be used for drawing. It can be used for more things. I could set it up at multiple angles. And the thing I do the most is drawing, so congratulations Apple, you're getting a trophy. All right, we're gonna tally all this up. Who gets the grand prize this year? It's Apple. Confetti, confetti, woo! You can leave your angry comments down below in the comment section. Let me know, what did I not take into consideration that I should have that may have like tilted this one way or another. But like I said at the top of the video, whether you get an Android tablet, this high-end Galaxy Tab, or a high-end iPad, you're going to get something that you really like. And I think what the choice comes down to is what ecosystem you like the best. Either way, you're getting something good. But what do you think? Let me know down below in the comments. Thank you all for watching. Talk to you in a couple of days.